Chronicles. This 12th chapter is called Golden Apples of Nidavellir. Fadir, why did Vanaheim choose a green elk as its coat of arms? Asked Hilda, kneeling starboard beside her father, who was twisting the steering paddle of a medium-sized drakkar heading north of the island. She admired the drackar's sail as it billowed in the western wind and imagined different sorts of explanations. King Agni winked to his daughter and stroked her short chestnut hair, ornamented with chains of seashells and bones.
Go on, tell us what you think it means.
Look, Fadir, a herd of elks on the shore. The crew of 6 Norsemen, including the king, lifted their heads to see a dozen light brown elks galloping on the eastern beach in the same direction as the drakkar, the fire crest. One great elk with magnificent antlers led the agitated herd of several males and a handful more of several females. Hilda rushed over to the port side of the boat and gripped onto the gunwale. The giant deers gracefully careered over the sand, almost in rhythm with the little girl's pounding heart. The herd suddenly changed its course, avoiding upcoming volcanic black rocks, and galloped out of sight into a dark pine wood. Agni saw the disappointment on Hilda's face, but tilted his head and raised his thick eyebrows to hint that he was expecting her to elaborate on what she was previously thinking about. Oh, the green elgar. Right. Perhaps one day a majestic elk fell off a cliff into the sea, running away from a mighty hunter, but managed to swim back to shore. When the elk emerged from the rolling waves and spume, the hunter was already there, ready to greet the elk with a long arrow. The elk was worn out from the difficult swim against the sea current, and yet stood proudly before the man, stretching his bow. He hesitated and slowly released the pressure on the bow string. By the time the hunter had lowered his arrow, clouds shifted above them and revealed a pale moon in the dusky sky. The moonlight illuminated the elk covered in seaweed and began to shimmer and radiate a green aura. The elk walked past the bewildered man, one of our ancestors, while almost brushing his cheeks with the enormous antlers. Ever since that day, the hunter, who was the king of Vanaheim, used the green elk symbol to represent our realm. After having seen the herd of elks on the sandy beach, Hilda's story sent a chill down the king's spine. He laughed.
I expect that wasn't the only theory you had up in that windmill mind of yours. That almost felt plausible. I like to believe that one actually was the reason why our ancestors chose the green elk as our coat of arms. It makes a better story to tell your grandchildren around the fire rather than explaining that we love to eat elks and they live in green woods.
The crew burst out with laughter and rowed more passionately around the island.
Now, my little fabulist, tell me which knot I should use to attach this rope to that cleat. And when you've done that, tell your brother to join me at the stern.
Hilda tied the cleat hitch knot perfectly, then tiptoed through the rowing men to fetch her brother Asmund, sweating under the summer sun. He gave her a friendly smile and sat her down to row in his place. She squealed as the oar lifted her up in the air like a doll. Asmund placed her on his shoulders and went to speak with the king.
Son, do you know where we are going and why we are here?
Hilda looked up at her tall brother as if he were going to say something silly.
The north, Fadir, to the realm of Muspelheim,
replied Asmund, offering to steer the ship.
And why? I'm not sure, Fadir. Are you planning an attack? Scouting for weaknesses in their coastal borders?
Hilda shook her head.
Yes, Dottir. Do you have something you'd like to share with your elder brother?
Said the king, slipping a large hand around her neck playfully. Well, Fadir, one can only guess what goes on in the mind of a great realm's ruler, she said with a cheeky smile. But maybe you were going to show Brodir how impregnable the golden area is from the sea. We are surely going to sail far enough away from the shipwrecks and hidden underwater rocks, and close enough to see Muspelheim's impressive shipyards and docks. Maybe you're going to ask him how he would choose to invade Muspelheim and raid the wooden castle. Asmund gave his twin sister a stern look, then shook his head with amusement. The king chuckled too.
Not far from the truth, Hildar, not far. But there is one detail you must remember, both of you. For as long as you can, imagining a plan and executing one rarely carries out as you expected. The best you can do is to contrive as many backup plans as possible. But most importantly, learn to adapt to any situation.
King Ogni suddenly grabbed Hilda and threw her overboard. Asmund yelled at his father, who simply said,
Adapt to the unknown, my son. Do what needs to be done.
Asmund thought for a split second to draw his sword and behead his Fadir, but instead he climbed up onto the gunwale, threw his blade to the floor, and dived into the choppy waves to save his sister. Hilda opened her right eye. She was in that black water well chamber where she had decapitated Sune and lost her left eye. The cobwebs were still there, as well as a strong scent of sap. She didn't have any tears left to shed, but thought of how Asmund had rescued her from the northern sea. Why had she been reliving that precise moment from her childhood? You didn't hesitate, Brodir. Neither did you, Vadir. Something had changed. She didn't feel so vindictively cold and detached as before, and she couldn't connect with the ash tree. She also hadn't noticed Sune standing there in the shadows. Hilda, Hilda, you didn't hear me calling you. The swans foresaw your arrival, and I've been here waiting for days. I've been gone days. How are you still alive? Surely you would know how my head grew back. The milk saved me, and Freyr, of course, who carried me to milk well. Sune rubbed his neck. No hard feelings. You knew I had to do it. How else was I to? Hilda couldn't recall where she had been over the last few days since she attempted the Orphan Web's ritual. All she could think of was her father throwing her into the deadly sea. Now that I have returned and apparently completed the well's torments, I have decided to bring back King Ogni, Eleanor, and Hedil's mother. We will erase their memories and start from there. Sune looked at the bulging object attached to Hilda's waist under her feathered dress. She can't hear us, said Sune telepathically to Verdante and Irpa swimming in their milk pond. What went wrong? With a bit of luck, the wells have stolen her powers. What's the matter, Sune? Asked Hilda, catching the young man looking at his previously chopped off head. We shall bring them back now. Hilda, we can't. Only fresh corpses can be properly revived. When bodies are brought back to the living, even weeks after their death, they don't truly return. You'll see what I mean when we go outside. What are you talking about? The Battle of Helheim wasn't that long ago. I'm sorry to have to break this to you, Hilda, but you've been gone for 2 years. For 2 whole years after the terrible battles between the Drogar and the 3 realms, no mist or drogs from Nebelwood were ever seen. A relative peace had settled amongst the inhabitants of the island. If you were on the right side of the wall, that is. Only occasional earthquakes occurred, without too many known repercussions. Muspelheim was still rising from the ashes. With the help of Helheim, Harald was able to build suitable barricades around where the new castle was to be erected. Vanaheim's population, or what was left of it, lived secluded behind locked gates within the Grönelger castle's outer walls. Villagers living near the sea or the woods were invited to join the town dwellers. Rural Helheimers also abandoned their homes outside the white walls of Moon Castle and moved within to preserve their safety. But what were all the islanders afraid of? Winters ago, the weeks of battle had taken its toll on humans and the Huldra. The resurrecting mist had brought back to life so many victims over and over again that some villagers were left in a state of dementia. Some had returned in pitiful physical state, scaring anyone who met them. Others were more undead than alive and had lost their personalities, their humanity. The fact that they wouldn't speak to their loved ones or do anything else than meander aimlessly around town was half the problem. Many had begun to take bites out of random villagers. The biters were taken seriously when one day a group of the undead attacked children playing in the fields around Helheim's Moon Castle. A handful escaped the undead with a few bite marks, while the others had been completely devoured. The undead would chew the bones for days, suck out the marrow, and swallow the bone fragments. Njal put an end to the social outrage and ordered all the undead to be exiled out of the castle walls, wherever they used to be. And that included Queen Asgard. The self-proclaimed king of Vanaheim, Gunnar, applied the same treatment to his lot of undead cannibals after his failed public executions. Crucifying the troublemakers and setting them on fire had little effect on them. Smashing them to bits with mallets was reasonably successful, but some did slowly regenerate, thus tormenting relatives who would have to witness yet another public battering of people they used to love and live with. So Gunnar banished the undead and made all trips out of Grönelger Castle's walls restricted. To King Njal's great displeasure, Astrid convinced him to save the Muspelheimers who were experiencing the same inconveniences, according to Vulcan messages from Harald. The reconstruction of a stone-walled golden eyrie was delayed due to delirious inhabitants who thought they were wolves. Since the undead had been kept out of each realm's walls, they now wandered the island with no visible purpose, except to feast on any warm-blooded victim they encountered. Travel between the realms had become treacherous, and seafarers found it easier to avoid the land and circle round the island to reach their desired destinations. Muspelheim had even opened up their docks to facilitate travel and trade. But the herds of the undead and the realms being in lockdown weren't the only news worth mentioning. Kyoku and Asmund were now the parents of 2 young boys. Kyoko named the first of the twins with silk black hair Napori, meaning mountain in her native tongue, a promise of strength and stability. The other was named Paykar, meaning spring, symbolizing new beginnings. Another child was on the way, which didn't stop her from cooking, weaving, or working in the vegetable gardens. It was sometimes claustrophobic being forced to stay within the town walls. Leaving Helheim wasn't forbidden, although Asmund wouldn't hear of it, especially since Kyoko was with child. She sometimes managed to leave through the Southern Gate to go for a walk along the beaches, where the undead were rarely sighted. Hedil offered his protection when Asmund was out hunting to avoid fueling his jealousy. Game was hard to find since the earthquakes began. Lots of animals had abandoned the woods and migrated west. Some parts of the forest had a sinister funereal gloom where trees and plants had withered. Some trees were overgrown with fungi, and there was a distinct smell of rot in the air. On this mildly warm summer's day, Asmund was out of town, hunting whatever the undead hadn't massacred. He rode carefully through the fetid woods in search for deer, wild boar, or elks that seemed to have gone extinct. Even the rabbits or squirrels would do.
Perhaps I should go fishing instead,
He said to himself, wiping spider webs out of his eyes. When he opened his eyes, his gaze met a woman standing straight ahead. She had long black hair, and at first he thought it was Kyoko. Then he recognized the glint in her eyes.
Hilda?
Brodir, I don't understand what has happened to me. We were at war only days ago.
At war. We're still at war, but the enemies have changed. Where have you been?
Said Asmund, dismounting. Oh, Asmund, she said, running to her brother's arms. Forgive me. As soon as her head touched his muscular chest, Hilda's mind received a bolt of lightning. She saw the island being swallowed up in ice. The sky was fiery red, and an enormous ball of flames was slowly falling down on her. "Moon!" she cried. Asmund held his sister by the arms.
Hilda, wake up!
The young woman felt his warmth and saw her dear brother again. The same one who had fished her out of the sea where her own father had thrown her. Asmund, never leave me. He held her tight and wondered what to do next. Should he invite her to Helheim, to those Hilda had sworn to defeat? Return to Vanaheim, to the people she had betrayed? First, he wanted a few answers from his troubled sister, where she had really been, Had she truly been in league with the Huldra, according to rumors spreading from his old town? Was she responsible for the never-ending war? Surely not. Asmund rode back to Helheim via a southern route. The beaches were less prone to undead danger, and using the southern gate was more convenient, obviously for fishermen too. A new secured dock was under construction so that the fish could be unloaded without having to worry about rotten jaws and bony claws. As he arrived below the high walls of Moon Castle, he spotted Kyoku walking through the gates with Hedil. Hilda was right behind her brother, arms around his waist, and she had also seen Hedil, which sent a violent shockwave through her chest. Her grip weakened, and she fell from the horse onto the sand. Hedil watched the woman he used to love as she slept. He held her hand and observed how much she had changed. The long black hair, her even paler face, the grey marks around the eyes, one missing, and the swollen belly. Hilda shuddered and woke in a sweat to Hedil's blue eyes. She didn't reject him this time and placed her cheek on his hand. My starling, I thought I'd never see you again.
I see you are expecting?
He replied, removing his hand from hers. Yes, I had almost forgotten. We will soon have a son. You've been gone for years, Hilda. I don't know how to explain what happened. I fell into a well only days ago. But when I was found in Nebelwood by the Huldra, they told me 2 winters had passed. So it is true. You've been plotting with the Huldra. They brought me back from hell, if that's what you mean. All I remember is how much I regret the things I said to you, and how Vadir and Modir were killed. Asmund and I buried them beside the raven statues. Brodir, and you, seriously, things have changed around here, haven't they? Not everything, replied Hedil, staring into Hilda's peppermint right eye. Hedil, would you take me there, please? I've been waiting to do that ever since you left. First, let me walk you around Moon Castle. You'll find the enemy's lair more welcoming than expected, and there are complications I need to tell you about. Kyoku wasn't too comfortable having Hilda to stay in Helheim, having to cook for her when she came to visit Asmund, avoiding her when she was on the parapets gazing eastwards. Kyoku was as much an uninvited guest as Hilda was, but she hadn't been the enemy's daughter, and she hadn't locked anyone up in a woodland prison. Be that as it may, Kyoku remained calm and polite whenever their paths crossed. She didn't mention the past, and neither did Hilda. New beginnings were important to Kyoko, like her 2 children, and she preferred to focus on them. Besides, Hilda was with child too, even if that was all they had in common.
My Ningyo, couldn't you try to get along with my sister? Since she arrived a full moon ago, it hasn't been easy for her. She isn't the demon people are whispering about, and she does appear to express some forms of remorse once in a while. With your experience with children, you should share some wisdom with her to cool her nerves.
Giving birth to twins wasn't the most pleasant experience I can recall, no. But I did survive, and so will she. I just don't want to spoil what we've got here, said Kyoko, rubbing her round belly.
I do understand, but give her a chance.
Kyoko huffed. The cursed day she stepped onto the shores of Anaheim still felt so fresh. Hilda hadn't given her much of a chance. Today I would like to go crab fishing. The Southern Tower guards said the beaches are safe. Esmond felt a pinch in his heart.
Will you be going alone?
Why do you ask? Replied Kyoko, gathering a bucket and a long knife.
For no reason. I thought you might like some company.
That's all right. I know you have building to do in Muspelheim. Will you be home tomorrow?
Whatever suits you, my Ningyo. Do you know how far away the castle is? Don't expect me for at least a few days.
Kyoko didn't understand why Asmund was so irritated lately. The most trivial things made him so sour. Hair in his soup, a wooden toy axe hitting his head during a duel between the twins, Hedil knocking on the door while he was about to go to sleep. Very well. Take care on horseback. I would prefer to know you were sailing north.
And I would prefer you stayed indoors.
Asmund patted Pekkar's head, nodded to Nuburi, and left. Kyoko raised her thin eyebrows to her twins and shrugged. Want to go on an adventure by the sea, my little ones? Hetty, said Nuburi, and Pekkar repeated the same deformed name. Why not? Leave your sword, Pekkar. No, we will not be needing dried flowers, Nuburi. Off we go. The 3 left their small home that was south to the castle, alongside other similar huts that Asmund said were for outsiders. Kyoko had replied that she preferred to be outside anyway. Hedil left Hilda to rest in his room. She wasn't pleased to find out that he and Kyoko had made a habit out of walking together on the shore. Hilda asked him not to go, but Hedil reminded her that they were only friends and that she should make an effort to accept that. The idea made her sick inside, but Hilda let him go. When the door clanged shut, a vivid image struck her mind She saw burning villages. The buildings were nothing like she had ever seen, as tall as the giant ash tree. Fire giants with shiny bodies walked through the ever-changing colored flames and herded a terrified population onto strange ships with no sails. A vision like those Voluspa would tell me about so long ago when we first met. So the black waters did have some effect on me. Seems I haven't lost all my powers. With the crack of a whip, Hilda heard a familiar voice cut through her brain. You have no powers. You simply know how to dip your long fingers into the unseen flow all around you. Hilda shivered, unable to recall who the unsettling voice belonged to. She dressed in haste, not forgetting a dagger and light sword, and decided to join her brother, who said he was leaving for Muspelheim. She had never visited the Golden Eyrie and wondered how the king would react. We all need to stick together, Harald. Lend a helping hand to defeat the creatures from hell. Wink, wink. Kyoko stood on barnacled rocks and surveyed the dunes and windy beach. The sea was rough, and Kyoko was glad that Asmund hadn't sailed north, despite her justified concerns. The island was a dangerous place, and the undead were proliferating. She kept an eye on Paykar, who had a knack for violence and breaking things. It wouldn't be long before he'd start throwing stones at his Kalmar brother, who enjoyed listening to the sound of the wind bouncing off the waves, or watching seabirds pecking at the sand for lugworms. Napuri was crouched near the ebbing tide, poking weakly sandworm castles that lugworms make. A few jellyfish were washed up around him, and Paykar didn't miss the opportunity to stab one with a stick and offer the trophy to Napuri on his head. The latter ran to his mother in tears, falling a few times onto his sandy face. You need to toughen that one up, said Hedil, joining Kyoko on the rocks. He's fine as he is. I doubt we'll ever be short of bloodthirsty bullies and kids who wish to grow up as tall and as strong as... Yes? You weren't trying to pull my leg, were you? Especially after asking me to find you at the beach. Kyoko frowned and placed a finger on her lips. You're confusing sometimes, Hedil. I'm sorry. I sometimes forget you come from so far away. To pull your leg means someone is joking. To ask someone to find them at the beach means that you want to seek revenge and probably fight it out on the sand. Kyoko suddenly thought of Takeshi, who'd invited her to meet him by the sea. What a strange expression, she said, tugging Hedil's trousers, nearly causing him to lose balance. He pretended to fall, giving Kyoko a start and hopped off the small rock. He held up his arms and offered to carry Kyoko down gently to the beach, which he did. "Hedi," cried Nobori, clutching Hedil's leg. "Are you a limpet or a mountain, little man?" said Hedil, looming over the child. "Does he have the juice?" said Kyoko, inviting them both to follow her. "Time will tell. Besides, limpets are like mountains, strong shells and hard to dislodge. But they can move." "All right, moving mountain, come with me," said Hedil to Nobori, who ran after the Prince of Helheim, giggling all the way to the sea. There was a low, rumbling noise coming from inland, but the two adults didn't hear it. The earth had shaken a few times since the undead began to roam their lands, and yet this minor tremor didn't even scare the flocks of plovers running along the beach. Hedil picked up a fossilized stone and threw it as far as he could into the choppy waves. Pekar immediately did the same and tossed the dead fish into the water. Nobori tried his best and splashed a yellow cockle into the sea at his bare feet. "So this is where you were born," said Hedil, stretching his arms to display the sea view. "Think you'll dive back in when your fishtail grows back?" When Hedil turned round, he received a pile of bladderwrack over his head. The children squealed with laughter, and Kyoko held her hands over her mouth, pretending to be shocked.
Come here, you!
Growled Hedil, ripping off some seaweed and throwing some back at her. One of the swollen air bubbles popped and oozed pale liquid over her eyes. They stung a little, and Kyoko called a truce. Hedil apologized and found an old handkerchief in his pocket to clean her face. It was a torn piece of fabric from Kyoko's old rainbow yukata that she had given him on the day they met. "You kept it," she said, blushing. "A gift is a gift. Fine piece of material, I must admit. My Huchi made it before she died."
Huchi?
"Like Asgard's mother, grandmother. And she made that in the land of monkeys and lice." "Rice, silly. What I would give for a bowl of rice." Hedil couldn't help thinking what I would do to find one for you. Perhaps Asmund and I could go fishing for some Far East one day. You could be our guide. "Wouldn't that be fun?" she said, thinking of all the complications and dangers that would await them. "Have you had any trouble lately with your problem?"
No, Kyoko.
Sighed Hedil, hiding his hands behind his back. To be able to speak to someone about it has done wonders. Nobody else could have helped me or accepted me as I am. "And when the moon is full?" "That's when I go hunting alone. Strangely enough, the undead have come in handy. I can run wild and absolutely demolish them, while also practicing self-control and transforming. I have an abandoned bear cave near the woods where I hide my clothes to avoid sneaking back into the castle, naked as the day I was born. Good thing you weren't born with clothes. My Mortier would have agreed. Hedil suddenly remembered Hilda's insinuating words before she went missing. When you see your loving parents, ask them where they found you. Do you still suspect Asgard wasn't your real mother? I don't see how she could have been, unless Modir and Fadir were demons in disguise. Demons can be kind sometimes, said Kyoko, drawing shapes in the sand with her fingers. And they can be deadly, thought Hedil, staring at Kyoko's nape. He battled with his rising pulse and left her to play with the children. Asmund was reluctant to take his sister with him to Muspelheim. His crew of 12 volunteers wouldn't be riding casually, and it wasn't the greatest idea to go horse riding in Hilda's condition. Nonetheless, he could tell she needed to get out of Mooncastle. People hadn't exactly been affable with her since she arrived in Helheim. Unlike Asmund, she hadn't blended in as well as he had, and the population always saw her as a Vanaheimer. Even King Jarl didn't understand why she didn't go back home. Her exile didn't make sense. In addition to the complications of traveling during pregnancy, it wasn't obvious which route to take. The men and women who had chosen to join Asmund were not delighted by his choice of transportation. Battling with the sea wasn't free of tragedy, and nobody would shy away from a deadly sword fight. But everybody knew that the outskirts of Helheim were haunted. The undead relatives of many roamed the island, haunting those who dared travel outside the white walls. Having to fight against these cursed memories of the past made their flesh crawl. Hilda was well aware of the upsetting possibility that they may stumble upon the undead corpses of Ogni and Eleonora. Hedil had shown her their empty graves, and they were surprised to find there another open grave in front of a raven sculpture next to the ship burial ground. Hedil's mother, Skuld, had also become one of the undead. Asmund decided to ride northwest around Moonstone Hills. It wasn't perfect, but neither were the somber woods or rocky hills, with no end of places to be ambushed. Even though the undead couldn't be described as discreet fiends with cunning plans. The west side of Moonstone Hills was closer to the sea. On the rider's left was a sheer drop into the rough waves. And on the right, a steep slope of ragged pine trees with branches all pointing southeast. The overgrown path felt like a death trap. I'm starting to regret I came, Brodir, said Hilda, still getting used to Hedil's horse. She hadn't ever really ridden any other horse than Freya, who probably made her job easier by being a huldra. who knew where she needed to go and at which pace. One bear attack and one of us will be backed over the edge.
We're ready for anything, sister. Look at Tora and Torsten. I'll speed, one hand on the reins, ready to shoot an arrow at any time.
I'm not worried. I'm cautious.
Planning the unexpected as always. I knew you'd like a bit of fresh air away from...
What were you going to say, Hedil? Asked Hilda, gazing up at the ghostly pine trees.
I've heard your squabbles. Why do you think I'm here instead of looking after the monsters?
Such a nice way to speak of your heirs, Brodir.
Heirs to what? We've got as much royalty left as kingfishers near Elivargar River.
Well, at least you have your mermaid. I don't have anything to complain about either, really. I just don't like my Hedil's inappropriate behavior.
What do you mean, sister?
Replied Asmund with brotherly concern. Hedil frequently spent his time with your wife. I find their outings together by the shore distasteful. If I didn't trust my starling, he would have his throat cut in his sleep already. Thorsten gave Hilda a grim stare for talking that way of the future king. Figuratively speaking, of course. I wouldn't harm my beloved Hedil. I just hope he would choose to go hunting, sharpen his blades, or help to build the new docks, rather than protect your wife when she carelessly goes for a walk. Asmund kept quiet and snapped the reins of his horse to speed it up. He had seen something moving up ahead and wanted to make sure what it was. The others slowed their horses and waited for Asmund's report. Without warning, his horse reared, brayed, and dropped Asmund to the ground. Hilda saw the riders around her rush forwards and realized that there really was a bear blocking the way. But the bear wasn't moving. Its ribcage was sticking out like a black woodpecker's red crest, and other animals had their heads stuck inside its carcass, tearing away at the rubbery flesh and fat. The archers sank arrows into the scavengers' backs, and the swordsmen dismounted to finish them off. The scavengers were not animals. The arrows had no effect apart from distracting the beasts, and the creatures pulled their bloody heads out of the bear's entrails and stood up on hind legs. "Biters!" cried Asmund, wiping blood from his forehead. The undead were nimbler than he remembered, and were soon upon him, groaning as if in pain while they gnashed their broken teeth. A blond man, even taller than Asmund, split one of them in two with a battle axe, but the upper half of the undead enemy squiggled back towards Asmund, scratching his legs with the same persistence. "Boar, watch out!" cried Asmund, as three other undead were about to pounce on him from behind. Too late, Boar struggled with the bony attackers, twisting frantically as if submerged by a swarm of bees. The other Helheimers dismembered the biters in their way and pulled at the two left with their teeth dug into Boar's back and shoulders. Boar bellowed and dragged three of the undead towards the cliff and hurled them into the sea. A rumbling noise of falling stones and rocks startled Hilda, and a horde of victims from the previous war crashed onto the path in front of her. The sight of mangled limbs and cadaverous men and women didn't shock her, but a maternal instinct scared her enough to flee. As she pulled at the reins, a grey-skinned undead woman with long claws jumped onto the horse's neck and slashed its throat. Hilda saw the heavy head fall to the floor with the undead drog clinging onto it. Hedil's horse collapsed to one side, sending Hilda crashing into a hawthorn bush. Her skin was covered in scrapes and scratches, but she was convinced the thorny branches would keep the undead at bay, while Asmund and the others came to her rescue. One of the undead rushed up to the hawthorn bush and stopped for a moment, staring into her eyes. It nonchalantly turned away and ran to the headless horse. While Asmund fought his way towards Hilda, he didn't fully take in what he thought he saw. Two more of the undead were standing there, motionless, in front of Hilda, trapped in a hawthorn bush. They left her alone and joined the equine feast. Asmund didn't have time to analyze the odd behavior of the undead and split and quartered as many skulls as he could. When the last of the undead had been thrown into the water below, Hilda pushed her way out of the spiky bush. She pressed her hand against her stomach, although she hadn't felt any abdominal discomfort. Asmund approached her with a worried look on his face, and Hilda grasped his hand, placing it on her belly. The unborn child gave a series of lively kicks that made him sigh with relief and kiss his sister on the forehead. Just then, another rising din sent lightning up their nerves. The commotion came from the north and sounded like a much larger horde of undead enemies raging towards them. From out of the high grass, a herd of elks belted past them. Asmund's group only just dodged out of the way and briefly saw what had actually galloped by. The elks were black as soot, with apparent wounds revealing bulging organs and part of their cracked skeletons. Their eyes were red, and the undead elks looked like they had escaped from hell. Hilda noticed one in particular, with its dark green coat covered in bladder-wrack seaweed. She immediately thought of her father when he had dropped her to her death in the northern seas. She held on to Asmund's hand with all her strength and said, "Thank you, Brodir." Later that day, Harald welcomed the two outcasts of Vanaheim and the other residents of Moon Castle to Muspelheim. King Radgrid was noticeably absent. He was said to have abdicated to let his nephew rule over what was left of the realm. The king lived alone in the underground caves beneath the Golden Eyrie, and nobody had actually seen him apart from Harald, the new young king.
You all look like you've been in the wars. Why didn't you sail here? Asked Harald. I was expecting you earlier.
My brother decided otherwise, said Hilda, bleeding from her arms and legs, dismounting Asmund's horse. I had imagined my arrival to the magnificent Golden Eyrie differently.
I can't say I wouldn't have preferred the war to have ended differently either,
said Harald, nodding to the demolished castle.
Though I do appreciate when something good springs out of evil. The way the rain always replaces the sun. I mean the other way round,
said Asmund, rubbing his nose.
Quite right. And so you must be Princess Hilda? I have heard so much about,
said Harald charmingly, offering a handkerchief for her wounds. How far from the truth were your spies, I wonder, said Hilda, brushing back her dark hair and taking the welcome gift.
Spies? Who needs spies when rumors spread like fungi in Nebelwood? I didn't know you had such obsidian black hair, or how dazzling your beauty was.
Hilda hid her eye patch with locks of hair and said, such a charmer. Rumors didn't paint you as flirtatious as your uncle. How is he, by the way? Asked Hilda, accepting Harald's hand as he guided the two siblings to the shipyard where the town was still intact.
Not well, I am afraid. He is glad we've made peace and trusts me to bring our relationship to fruition. Are you speaking of Astrid, Vestrid, and Bjorn?
Asked Asmund, leading his horse along the cobbled path down to the shipyard.
I do look forward to meeting Astrid one day, but I was thinking more of statecraft and how our three realms could expand. That would depend a lot on how we deal with the biters, and I don't see how King Gunnar will be of much assistance, said Asmund.
What exactly do you mean by expanding? Taking back the wildlands and crushing the undead? Or were you inviting Helheim to use your docks and fabulous dragars? Said Hilda, admiring the fleet of ships.
You see clearly through the mist,
said Harald enigmatically, which caught Hilda off guard. Had he seen her during the battle that burned his castle to ashes?
I did have something to suggest along those lines, but I will elaborate during tonight's feast in honor of Helheim's benevolent and remarkable ambassadors. I'll drink to anything after what we just went through. Perhaps a toast to driving every last demon into the sea,
said Asmund.
We've tried that. They just keep floating back ashore. Killer whales tasted some, took a few bites out, but didn't want to finish the snappers off, unfortunately,
said Harald.
I wish I did know how to crush them for good. Their unending power must come from somewhere. Another trick from the woods,
said Asmund. Or a divine punishment for wasting the Valkyrie's time, added Hilda.
What did you mean by that, Princess Hilda?
Asked Harald, inviting her down a narrow arched alleyway into his headquarters in the docks. Well, we've been cursed to return to war for so long that the Valkyries must hate us for it. Hovering over our futile battles for nothing, without any heroes really dying, she replied.
Sister always had a thing for Valkyries. I suppose Vadir did too, naming her out of respect for Hildur, the holy guardian of the great ash tree,
said Asmund.
I never really knew my own Vadir, but Radgrid said that they were similar in their beliefs, or should I say disbeliefs. The gods do make interesting stories, though. Enough chit-chat. Make yourselves at home. It isn't much yet, and thanks to you, we'll soon be able to invite you back to the new Eyrie, as golden as the bonfire that burned it down.
The guests from Helheim tended to their wounds and rested a while. The trip to Muspelheim had been a debacle. The next time anyone had the bright idea to assist the Northerners, the voyage to them would be by sea. Besides, only boats could transport enough equipment, material, and men fast enough over such a distance. This expedition was meant to be purely diplomatic, to assess what really needed to be achieved and how long it would take. The sun was setting beyond the small peninsula where the wooden castle used to stand. Long tables and finely decorated chairs had been set up amongst the dragars on stilts in the middle of the shipyard. Torches were lit while food and beverages were served. Harald led Hilda to her seat and moved the chair backwards for her to sit on it. Refraining from telling him she was fully capable of sitting down all by herself, she asked, "Why did you choose to dine here, of all places, King Harald?"
Our ships are Muspelheim's pride. They are splendid, wouldn't you agree?
She had to admit that these dragars were nothing like Vanaheim's old boats. Helheim's weren't any better, but these ones seemed too finely decorated to be sturdy enough at sea. Are you sure they won't capsize as soon as the waves crack their bow? All those gilded rims and flowery nonsense must weigh it down.
Spoken like a true lady. Perhaps Asmund has a more acquired taste for exquisite craftsmanship. They are beauties, Harald, I have to admit,
said Asmund, watching the plates of roasted meat being placed on the table.
See? I knew one of you had a minimal flair for aesthetics.
Harald waited until everybody's aurochs horn was full of wine, then said,
Imagine a fleet of these dragars crossing the oceans, cracking through enemy lines of distant lands. Imagine yourself at the stern of one of our finest ships, leading your army to conquer new realms. This island is too small. Our culture and passion needs to spread as far as it can sail. Consider this offer. My welcome guests from our beloved yet infested island. Join me. Let us unite in one formidable, unstoppable force that will slice through any obstacle before us.
Asmund looked around the table at his fellow men and women from Helheim and said,
That's certainly something worth considering. First, we should rack our brains to find a way of slicing through the undead. Then we can dream together of golden pastures in foreign lands. Wouldn't you agree? Perfectly put, Asmund. To the true death of the snappers.
To their true death, replied Hilda, and everyone else repeated the phrase, eager to drink and feast. Hilda raised her scratched nose and noticed a foul smell drifting through the shipyard. Soon afterwards, she saw a few sheep wandering between the draggards. Looking more carefully round the dim shipyard, she wondered how she hadn't spotted the flocks of sheep earlier. She pinched her nose and drank from her leather pouch.
Yes, we've had to mingle with the farm animals, unfortunately. The snappers took most of our aurochs, but we successfully saved the hens, sheep and goats. After a while, you forget about the stench. I expect we'll say the same about the undead after a few years,
said Asmund.
True, the horrors we get used to. By the way, isn't it horrible having to live so far from each other?
Said Harald, winking at Hilda.
I'm sure Astrid would agree, King Harald,
said Asmund, getting slightly annoyed by Harald's attempts to seduce his sister. She was Hedil's companion and carried his child. Did this man have no honor?
When you see her, Hilda, perhaps you could share with her all that Muspelheim has to offer. If you like, I could give you a private tour of our gold mines. No outlander has ever set foot in them. After some killer whale tongue, blackberries and ale, perhaps. The wind has calmed down, and there is a warm breeze under this fabulous gilt crescent moon. Did you know we will be covering the new castle in feathers of gold from our mines? Just as beautiful as the yellow moon above, or nearly as beautiful as...
said Harald, staring at Hilda's lips. Hilda finished her Aurochshorn and dug into the mutton. Something to consider, Harald.
Sistir, need I remind you of whom awaits you back in Helheim?
Said Asmund under his breath.
His people are at our table, and your attitude will surely not be overlooked.
Really, Brodir? Perhaps you forget how close your wife is to Helheim's heir. Do you know what he keeps every day in one of his pockets? No? We'll ask him next time you see him, when he's not walking along the beach with your own loved one.
Come now. We're all tired, frustrated by the snappers. The hot weather can play tricks on us too. Go straight to the brain sometimes, just like a barrel of ale. Forget the quarrels and listen to what I have to say.
The siblings dropped the private topic and allowed Harald to explain his ideas of expansion and glory for the islanders. This was actually something every inhabitant of the island would cherish. Fighting each other brought no glory or satisfaction, and certainly no seat at Odin's table. The undead had to be dealt with, and the three depleted realms all needed a proper purpose to keep on fighting, a dream to follow. And may I ask, Harald, said Hilda, wiping her lips with the back of her hand, under which banner do you suggest we all unite and crush the poor souls living beyond the seas? The other Muspelheimers and Helheimers paused their feasting and pricked up their ears.
My friends, I've given this very question a lot of thought. And I'm not ashamed to say that I think you'll all love my idea as much as I do,
said Harald, standing up on his chair.
Let's hear it then,
said Asmund impatiently.
As I was saying, when I look at you all, I speak not lightly when I proudly call you my friends. At my side, friends of Vanaheim, the brave defenders of the green elk with viper antlers. My friends of the two-headed white dragon. It warms my heart to have you at my table. My faithful warriors of the Firebird, never willing to give up, even after death. Yes, we used to be enemies, at each other's throats. But before that, didn't we live in peace? Didn't we go about our business of invading new lands without interfering with each other's ideals? We all know when the wars began. I'm not sure we know exactly why, though. And every realm probably has its own story. Be that as it may, our realms were once feared wherever we sailed, but we never sailed as one. Imagine what one mighty force of 3 combined realms could do. The two-headed dragon, the green elk, and the firebird fighting together as one great army. The greatest army Odin has ever seen. Just imagine our impressive 4-headed beast crest, our daunting banners.
All this does sound overwhelmingly interesting, King Harald. But I ask you once again, said Hilda, biting her thumbnail. Who would we be fighting for? Who would be our ruler? And what would we be called? Muspelheimers? Of Muspelheim Island?
I do like the ring to that, but no.
Harald hopped down from his chair and circled round the table.
Long ago, we forged our coveted and feared weapons in the forges of Nibelungen Mountains. Why did we abandon them? Because of a supposed giant who rides a wolf with viper reins? Because the forges are cursed? Or because all those who venture into the mountains never return? Well, I say that we aren't frightened children, scared of witch tales and afraid of our own shadows. We need to raid Nibelungen and get the forges running again. Make new mystical weapons that we can use against the snappers. And then against the trembling worlds all around us. This is a new dawn for our kind. A new moon. Need. The dark woods are spreading over the fields. Our Velir and the dead have taken our lands hostage. But we will thrive in the darkness of the new moon. Take back the forges, take back our great island, and take our wrath across the seas under the banner of Nidavellir. Anyone can rule for all I care. I simply have ideas, and I like to see them come to fruition.
Nidavellir Island. It has a ghostly tone to it.
said Asmund, actually impressed by Harald's long speech.
Our enemies would have nightmares even before we struck them.
3 emblems as one coat of arms. What about 3 kings to rule the island of Nidavellir? Suggested Hilda.
A triangle of power. I like that idea too,
Said Harald, raising his aurochs horn once more.
to the idea of Nidavellir and the 3 Dark Lords. Mörk Lords. To Nidavellir, to Mörk Lords.
Cried Asmund. To the Isle of Nidavellir, said Hilda with a smile, gazing at the waning crescent moon. Nidavellir. When most of Harald's guests had either passed out after riding too many sheep or gone to bed in a whirlpool of dreams, the king was far too excited to let this special day end. Hilda seemed to be in the same state of euphoria and let Harald show her Muspelheim's secret mines. There wasn't really much to see, apart from the signs of its obvious inactivity. Hilda wondered if the real secret concerning the gold mine was that it had run dry. Harald and Hilda locked arms to keep steady on the wet descending path. Scary shadows stretched all over the cave as they walked further downwards, holding torches. Midway down the tunnels, Harald removed a fake stone wall panel, unlocked an iron door behind it, then a secondary dusty door, a third, and a 4th one with 3 locks and thick cobwebs. Hilda's face lit up when she saw the contents of the long storage chamber. Her torch's flame quivered as it revealed a huge stockpile of gold that seemed to go on as far as the eyes could see. I've never seen so much before, she said with honest amazement. We have a meager fool's gold stockpile, or should I say had one, beneath Grunelger Castle. I commanded the blacksmith to make me golden apples when I was young. Nothing as charming as this, that I can say.
I own this golden grotto, Hilda, and I can admit that I have never met a woman as charming as yourself,
said Harald, offering a large nugget of gold. Turn it into an apple if you wish, or a ring. Harald, you're too kind, and perhaps a bit presumptuous. You know the Prince of Helheim and I
are not married. I am not either. Asmund is a fine man, full of piss and vinegar, but we both know that you are the real worthy ruler of Vanaheim. You should be the 3rd Mörk Lord, Mörk Lady Hilda.
Asmund Hedilor Niall can be the second, but we surely agree that Gunnar can't be part of the new order of things.
King Gunnar, said Hilda with a big smile. He has his uses, and he has been keeping the throne warm until we decide to go home.
I thought so. What's keeping you? I hear of a stranger from the east living in Moon Castle.
Oh, you do you? Kyoko is her name, and she isn't the problem. I have my own issues to take care of before riding through the gates of Grönelgar again, said Hilda, stroking her round belly.
May I?
Asked Harald, walking closer to touch her abdomen. Doing so, he accidentally stepped on a large spider, crushing it to a pile of hairy legs and goo. Hilda screamed in terror. What's ever the matter, my dear Hilda? Asked Harald, inspecting what she was staring at with such dread. Oh, I didn't know you were afraid of spiders. Hilda closed her eyes and slowly exhaled. I'm not. It's time to leave.
Very well, Princess. I'm sorry to have caused you any discomfort. Let me make it up to you. Would you like to rest in my spacious temporary quarters this very night?
Too soon? Harald, I need to leave Muspelheim. Now. I'll inform Jarl of your proposal, and we'll take care of Gunnar. Please forgive me. No need, replied Harald, kissing her hand.
At least wait until dawn. The sunrise is worth any pile of gold, or bedroom follies.
If you wish, said Hilda, walking away in thought. She was still haunted by the vision of a gigantic arachnid scarlet legs lost somewhere in the depths of her misty mind. Harald enjoyed the game she was playing and was surprised to feel real desire for her suddenly awakening. He locked the doors and followed Hilda towards the gold mine's gate, absorbing every echoing step she made. See you next time for chapter 13 of the Hilda Chronicle.